The day I found the small, weathered headstone poking through the overgrown blackberry bushes behind our new house. I thought it was charming. A little memorial to someone's beloved pet from decades past. I had no idea I was about to uncover an ancient pet cemetery that would turn our dream home into a living nightmare, where the spirits of long-dead animals still roam the property, searching for their owners who never returned. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar with pet spirits, because what I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about death, and the incredible loyalty of our animal companions. My name is Sarah, and 6 months ago, my husband Mike and I bought a beautiful Victorian house in Salem, Oregon. The property was gorgeous. 3 acres of what we thought was simply overgrown land that would give our 2 kids plenty of space to run and play. The house itself was built in 1892, and while it needed some work, it had all the character and charm we were looking for in our forever home. The realtor mentioned that the property had a rich history, but she never elaborated on what that meant. If she had, we might have made a very different decision. We moved in on a crisp October morning, and I remember feeling so grateful as I watched the moving truck pull away. Finally, we had made it. After years of saving and apartment living, we had our dream home, the kids. Emma, who's 8, and Jake, who's 10, were thrilled about having their own rooms and a huge backyard to explore. Mike was already planning where he'd put his workshop, and I was dreaming about the garden I'd plant come spring. The first few weeks were blissful. We spent our time unpacking, settling in and getting to know our new neighborhood. The house had an old-world charm that made every day feel like we were living in a fairy tale. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, windows that let in the most beautiful morning light, and a wraparound porch that was perfect for evening conversations. It was during the 3rd week that I decided to start clearing some of the overgrown vegetation in the backyard. The previous owners had clearly let nature take over, and there were areas where blackberry bushes and wild roses had grown so thick you couldn't see what was underneath. I started with a small section near the back of the property, thinking I'd create a little meditation garden where I could sit and enjoy the morning coffee. That's when I found the first headstone. It was small, about the size of a dinner plate, made of weathered granite with an inscription that was barely visible through decades of moss and lichen. I carefully cleaned it off with my gardening gloves, and slowly the words became clear. Bella, beloved companion, 1923. 1937, forever in our hearts. My heart melted. Someone had loved their pet so much that they'd given her a proper burial with a beautiful headstone. I thought it was incredibly sweet, and I made a mental note to create a little memorial garden around it. Maybe plant some flowers in Bella's honor. But as I continued clearing the area, I found another headstone, then another and another by the end of that afternoon. I had uncovered 12 small graves, each with its own weathered marker dogs. Cats, even a few that seemed to be for birds and rabbits. The dates ranged from the 1890s all the way through the 1950s. Some had elaborate headstones with carved angels or paw prints. Others were simple slabs with just a name and dates. But each one told the story of a beloved pet who had been laid to rest with the same care and love that people reserve for family members. I was fascinated. This wasn't just a pet cemetery. It was a piece of history. I spent the rest of the week researching the property, trying to learn more about the families who had lived here before us. What I discovered was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The house had been built by a family named the Winterborns, who had lived there for over 60 years. They were known throughout the community for their incredible love of animals. They bred champion show dogs, rescued stray cats, and even took in injured wildlife. Their property had been like a sanctuary, and when their animals passed away, they buried them in the back, with the same ceremony they would have given a family member. The Winterborns had no children of their own, so their pets were their family. According to old newspaper articles I found, when Mr. Winterborn died in 1954, He was buried in the human cemetery across town. Mrs. Winterbourne lived alone in the house for several more years. But neighbors reported that she would spend hours each day sitting in the pet cemetery, talking to the headstones, as if her beloved companions were still there listening. Hit the like button if this story's giving you chills, because it's about to get much more terrifying the more I learned about the Winterbournes and their deep connection to their pets. The more I understood why they had created such an elaborate resting place for their animal family. But what I didn't understand yet was why, decades after their deaths, the pets were still there. The first sign that something wasn't right came about 2 weeks after I discovered the cemetery. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, when I heard scratching sounds coming from inside the walls at first. I assumed it was mice, or maybe squirrels that had gotten into the attic. Old houses always have their share of uninvited guests, and I made a mental note to call an exterminator. But the scratching was different than what you'd expect from rodents. It was rhythmic, almost like a dog pawing at a door. Scratch, scratch, scratch paw, scratch, scratch, scratch. It would go on for several minutes, then stop completely. Do you hear that? I asked Mike that evening as we were watching TV. He muted the television and we listened. Sure enough, there it was, scratch, scratch. Scratch paws, scratch. Scratch, scratch. Sounds like something's trying to get in. He said I'll check the attic tomorrow. But when Mike inspected the attic the next day, he found nothing, no signs of animal intrusion. No droppings, no disturbed insulation. Just an empty, clean space with no explanation for the sounds we'd been hearing. The scratching continued for several more days. Always in the same pattern. Always seeming to come from different parts of the house. Sometimes it was in the walls of the living room. Sometimes in the kitchen. Sometimes upstairs in the hallway. But it was always that same rhythmic pattern. Like an animal trying to communicate. Let me know in the comments what you think was really happening here. Because things were about to get much more disturbing. It was Jake who first saw the dog. He came running into the kitchen, one morning, his face pale and his eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, there's a dog in the backyard. But it's not really there." "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, looking out the window. I could see our entire backyard, but there was no dog anywhere. "It was by the stones," he said, pointing toward the area where I'd uncovered the pet cemetery. It looked like an old golden retriever, but when I blinked, it was gone. I knelt down to Jake's level. Sometimes shadows can play tricks on our eyes, especially early in the morning. "Are you sure you saw a dog?" He nodded emphatically. It was golden and fluffy. And it was just standing there looking at the house. But Mom, it was kind of see-through. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to stay rational. Kids have active imaginations. And Jake had been excited about the pet cemetery ever since I told him about it. It made sense that he might start seeing things that weren't there. But 2 days later, Emma saw it too. She was playing in the backyard when she came running inside, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, there's a ghost dog outside and it's trying to follow me." My heart started racing. 2 kids seeing the same thing was harder to dismiss as imagination. "Show me where you saw it, sweetheart." Emma led me to the sliding glass door that opened onto our back patio. She pointed toward the pet cemetery. Her little hand shaking, it was right there standing by the stones. It looked sad, like it was crying. I stared at the area where she was pointing, but I saw nothing except the weathered headstones poking up through the grass. What did it look like? It was golden and had long hair. And I could see through it like it was made of fog. It started following me when I was playing, but when I turned around to look at it, it would stop when I started running. It followed me all the way to the door. Comment below what you think was really happening here. Because the rational part of my brain was starting to lose the battle against the supernatural evidence that was mounting. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the kids had seen, and whether there might be some logical explanation. Maybe it was a neighbor's dog that had gotten loose, and the kids had only caught glimpses of it through the trees. Maybe the morning light had been playing tricks on their eyes. But at 3 a.m. I heard something that made my blood run cold. Barking not from outside the house, but from inside. It was coming from downstairs. A deep, mournful sound that seemed to echo through the walls. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, listening to the impossible sound of a dog barking inside our house. When we didn't own a dog, Mike was still asleep beside me, but I could hear the barking, as clear as if there was a dog standing in our living room. It wasn't aggressive barking. It was the kind of sound a dog makes when it's trying to get attention, when it wants something from its owner. I slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The barking continued, and now I could tell it was definitely coming from the first floor. Slowly, I made my way down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. When I reached the living room, the barking stopped. The room was empty, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights filtering through the windows. I stood there in the darkness, listening. But the house was completely silent. No barking, no scratching. No sounds at all except the gentle creaking of the old house settling. I was about to head back upstairs when I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. On the hardwood floor, leading from the living room toward the back door, were muddy paw prints. Large paw prints like those of a big dog. But we didn't have a dog, and all the doors and windows were locked. Subscribe if you want to hear more terrifying, true stories like this one, because what happened next convinced me that we were dealing with something far beyond the realm of normal explanation. The next morning, I showed the paw prints to Mike in the daylight. They were clearly visible, large muddy prints that definitely belonged to a dog, tracking from the living room to the back door. Mike examined them carefully, his face growing more concerned by the minute. "And these are fresh," he said, kneeling down to get a better look. "The mutie is still damp, but Sarah, how is this possible? We don't have a dog. And there's no way an animal could have gotten inside." I told him about the barking I'd heard during the night, and about what the kids had seen in the backyard. Mike listened with growing alarm as I described the golden retriever that appeared to be translucent, the rhythmic scratching sounds in the walls, and the feeling that we were being watched whenever we went near the pet cemetery. "You think it's connected to the graves you found?" he asked. I don't know what to think. "But Mike, I'm starting to believe that the pets buried out there might not be resting as peacefully as we assumed." That afternoon, we decided to do some more research. While Mike stayed home with the kids, I drove to the Salem Historical Society to see if I could find more information about the Winterborn family and their beloved pets. What I discovered there changed everything. The Historical Society had an entire file on the Winterborn property, including photographs, newspaper clippings, and even some personal documents that had been donated by distant relatives. As I sat in their research room, surrounded by dusty books and filing cabinets, I learned the true story of what had happened on our property. The Winterborns hadn't just loved their pets. They had been obsessed with them. According to several newspaper articles from the 1940s and 1950s, neighbors had complained about the unnatural attachment the couple had to their animals. They treated their pets like human children, holding birthday parties for them, dressing them in clothes, and even having professional photographs taken for Christmas cards. But the most disturbing thing I learned was about what happened when the pets died. According to a diary entry from Mrs. Winterborn that had been preserved in the Historical Society's collection, she and her husband had performed elaborate burial ceremonies for each of their pets. They would hold candlelit vigils that lasted for days, during which they would speak to the deceased animals as if they were still alive. They believed that their love was so strong that it could keep their pets' spirits connected to the physical world. In one particularly chilling entry, Mrs. Winterbourne wrote, "Chester passed away today, but I know he is still with us. I can feel his presence in the house, and I hear his paws on the hardwood floors late at night. Love transcends death, and our beloved companions will never truly leave us, as long as we keep them alive in our hearts, and call to them from beyond the veil." The diary entries continued for years, detailing Mrs. Winterbourne's belief that her deceased pets were still living in the house with her. She would set out food for them, talk to them throughout the day, and even claim to see them walking through the rooms and playing in the backyard. But the most disturbing entry was from 1956, just 2 years before Mrs. Winterbourne's death. The authorities came today and said I need to stop the ceremonies. They don't understand that love is the strongest force in the universe, and that our pets are still here with us, waiting for us to acknowledge them. I will never stop calling to them. They are my family, and family never abandons each other, not even in death. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content. Because what I read next explained everything that was happening to our family. The final entry in Mrs. Winterbourne's diary, dated just 1 week before her death, read, "I have bound them to this place with my love and devotion. They will never leave this property, and they will never stop protecting it. Future families who live here will understand the power of unconditional love, and they will care for my precious companions. As I have cared for them, they are guardians now. Eternal guardians of their home." I sat in that research room, my hands trembling as I read those words. Mrs. Winterbourne hadn't just buried her pets on the property. She had somehow spiritually bound them to it, convinced that her love could keep them anchored to the physical world even after death. The Historical Society had one more document that made my blood run cold. It was a report from the Salem Police Department dated 1959, just 1 year after Mrs. Winterbourne's death. The new owners of the house had called the police multiple times, complaining about strange noises, unexplained animal sounds, and the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes. According to the police report, the family had lasted only 6 months before moving out, claiming the house was haunted by the spirits of dead animals. The report noted that officers had responded to the property several times, but had found no evidence of living animals on the premises. Over the next 40 years, the house had changed hands 17 times. Each family stayed for less than 2 years before moving out, always citing similar complaints: unexplained animal sounds, the feeling of being watched, and the disturbing sensation that they were sharing their home with invisible pets. We were just the latest family to discover that Mrs. Winterbourne's love had indeed transcended death, but not in the beautiful way she had imagined. Her obsession had created something unnatural, something that had turned the loyalty and love of her pets into a supernatural prison that kept them bound to the property, decades after their deaths. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because when I returned home that evening, I knew we were in serious trouble. I found Mike in the kitchen, his face pale and his hands shaking. "Sarah, something happened while you were gone. Something that convinced me we need to get out of this house." What happened? I was in the living room with Emma and Jake, and they started pointing at the corner near the fireplace. They said there was a cat there, a black and white cat that was sitting and watching us. I couldn't see anything, but both kids were tracking something with their eyes, following it as it moved around the room. Mike paused, running his hands through his hair. Then Emma started talking to it. She said, "Hi, kitty. What's your name?" And Sarah. I swear I heard a sound. It was faint, but it sounded like a meow, like something was responding to her. "But you didn't see anything?" "Nothing, but the kids were having a full conversation with something that was invisible to me." Emma said the cat's name was Whiskers, and that it was looking for its mommy. Jake said it looked sad and wanted to go home. I felt my heart sink. Whiskers. I remembered seeing that name on one of the headstones in the pet cemetery, Whiskers 1931. 1945 beloved companion of the Winterborn family. Mike, I think the pets are trying to communicate with the kids because children are more open to supernatural experiences. They're looking for their owners, but the Winterborns died decades ago. They're trapped here, confused and lost that night. We decided to sleep in the same room with the kids, just to be safe. We set up air mattresses in Emma's room and told them it was like a family camping trip, but none of us slept well. Throughout the night, we heard sounds that had become all too familiar. Scratching in the walls, the soft padding of paws on hardwood floors, and the occasional bark or meow that seemed to come from empty air. Let me know if you want me to investigate this further, because what happened the next morning was the most terrifying experience of our entire ordeal. I woke up at dawn to find Emma standing at the bedroom window, her small hand pressed against the glass. "Mommy, they're all outside," she whispered. I joined her at the window and looked out into the backyard. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the early morning mist rising from the grass, and the weathered headstones of the pet cemetery, visible through the overgrown vegetation. But then Emma pointed, and I saw something that made my heart stop. There, moving through the mist like living shadows, were the shapes of animals. Dogs of various sizes, cats slinking between the headstones, and even what looked like a rabbit, hopping near the edge of the cemetery. They were translucent like images projected onto fog, but they moved with purpose and intelligence. "They're visiting their graves," Emma said softly. "They do it every morning. They're looking for their mom and daddy, but they can't find them." I counted at least 8 distinct shapes moving through the cemetery, each one pausing at different headstones, as if paying respects to their own graves. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. The spirits of these beloved pets, bound to the property by their owner's misguided love, unable to find peace or move on to whatever comes after death. But as I watched, something changed. The ghostly animals began to move toward the house, and I realized they weren't just visiting their graves. They were patrolling the property, just as Mrs. Winterborn had intended. They were guardians, protectors. But their protection had become a supernatural haunting that trapped them in an endless cycle of duty and devotion. The largest shape, which looked like a golden retriever, stopped directly below Emma's window and looked up at us. Even though it was translucent, I could see its eyes sad. Intelligent eyes that seemed to be pleading for something. "That's the dog we saw before," Emma whispered. "I think his name is Buddy." Buddy. Another name I remembered from the headstones. Buddy 1920. 1934 faithful companion and guardian. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comment section, because what happened next convinced me that these spirits weren't malevolent. They were just lost and confused, still trying to fulfill their duties to owners who would never return. The ghostly golden retriever began to bark, but this time I could hear it clearly. It wasn't the aggressive bark of a guard dog. It was the excited bark of a pet trying to get its owner's attention. The other spirits joined in, and suddenly the backyard was filled with the sounds of animals greeting their family, but we weren't their family. We were strangers living in their home, and they didn't know what to do with us. "Mike," I said quietly, not wanting to wake Jake, "I think I know what we need to do." Mike joined us at the window, his eyes widening as he saw the ghostly animals moving through the mist. "Are those the pets from the cemetery?" "They're not trying to scare us, Mike. They're trying to protect us, just like Mrs. Winterborn trained them to do. But they're confused because we're not their family." I had an idea, but I wasn't sure if it would work. "I think we need to acknowledge them. Mrs. Winterborn's diary said she kept them bound to this place with love and devotion. Maybe if we show them the same respect and love, we can help them find peace." That afternoon, while the kids were taking a nap, Mike and I went out to the pet cemetery. We had stopped at the store and bought fresh flowers. Not elaborate arrangements, but simple bouquets that we could place on each grave. We also brought a small portable speaker and some classical music, thinking that a peaceful atmosphere might help us communicate with the spirits. As we approached the cemetery, I felt a familiar chill in the air, but this time it wasn't frightening. It felt expectant, like something was waiting to see what we would do. We started with Bella's grave, the first one I discovered. I placed a small bouquet of daisies on the weathered headstone and spoke directly to the spirit. I couldn't see, but somehow knew was there. Bella, we're the new family living in your house. We know you loved your owners very much. And we know you're still trying to take care of this place. But your mommy and daddy aren't coming back. They're at peace now, and they want you to be at peace too. The air around us grew colder, and I could feel a presence watching us, listening to every word. Mike stepped forward and placed flowers on Buddy's grave. Buddy, you've been a good dog. You've protected this place for so many years. But it's time for you to rest now. Your family is waiting for you on the other side. We continued around the cemetery, placing flowers on each grave and speaking to each spirit by name. Chester Whiskers, Rosie Max Luna, Princess Duke Rusty, Patches and Sophie 12 beloved pets, who had been trapped in the physical world by their owner's refusal to let them go. As we finished placing the last bouquet, something extraordinary happened. The temperature dropped even further, and the air began to shimmer like heat waves, rising from summer pavement. One by one, the ghostly forms of the pets began to appear. They weren't frightening or translucent anymore. They looked solid, real, and absolutely beautiful. Each one appeared exactly as they would have looked in life healthy, happy and surrounded by a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from within. Buddy the golden retriever approached us first. He sat at my feet and looked up at me with eyes full of gratitude and intelligence. I reached down to pet him, and although my hand passed through his form, I could feel warmth and love radiating from his spirit. One by one, the other pets approached us. Whiskers, the black and white cat, rubbed against Mike's legs. Chester, a dignified German shepherd, sat at attention as if receiving final orders. Each spirit seemed to be saying goodbye, thanking us for acknowledging their service and giving them permission to finally rest. But the most incredible thing happened when Princess, a small white terrier, approached the spot where we had placed her flowers. She looked back at the house one last time, then turned to face the setting sun. As she did, her form began to glow brighter, and I heard something that brought tears to my eyes. The sound of a woman's voice calling from somewhere far away. "The princess, come here. Baby girl, come to mommy." It was Mrs. Winterbourne's voice, calling from whatever realm she had moved to after death. And Princess, tail wagging with joy, bounded toward that voice and disappeared into the golden light. One by one, the other pets heard their names being called from beyond the veil. Their owners, who had been waiting for them in the afterlife, were finally able to call them home, because we had given the spirits permission to go. Hit the like button if this story gave you chills, because what happened next was the most beautiful and terrifying moment of the entire experience. As the last spirit disappeared into the light, the cemetery fell silent. The oppressive feeling that had haunted our property for months was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and completion. But just as I was about to tell Mike that I thought it was over, I heard one final sound, a single bark. Distant and fading, but filled with so much love and gratitude that it brought tears to my eyes. It was Buddy calling back to us from wherever he had gone, thanking us for setting him free. That night, for the first time since we'd moved into the house, we slept peacefully, no scratching in the walls. No phantom paws on the hardwood floors. No mysterious barking in the darkness. The house felt different, lighter somehow. As if a great weight had been lifted from its foundation. In the morning, I went out to check on the pet cemetery, half expecting to find that the flowers we had placed had been disturbed or moved. But they were exactly where we had left them, and the entire area felt serene and peaceful. The headstones were still there. Of course, but they no longer felt like markers of trapped spirits. They were simply memorials to beloved pets, who had been deeply loved and were now finally at rest. Over the following weeks, we decided to properly restore the pet cemetery. We cleared away the overgrown vegetation, cleaned and repaired the headstones, and created a beautiful memorial garden, where families could come to remember their beloved pets. We learned that several families in the area had pets buried there from the early days of the property, and they were grateful to have a place to visit and pay their respects. But the most important thing we learned was about the power of love, and the responsibility that comes with it. Mrs. Winterbourne's love for her pets had been genuine and deep, but her inability to let them go had trapped them in a supernatural prison for decades. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to let go, to allow our beloved companions to find peace and move on to whatever comes next. Comment below what you think really happened here, because our experience taught us that death isn't the end of love. It's simply a transformation. The bond between humans and their pets is so strong that it can transcend the physical world. But that transcendence should be about reunion and peace, not about clinging to the past. We still live in the house, and we've never had another supernatural experience. The pet cemetery remains a beautiful, peaceful place where we sometimes sit and reflect on the nature of love, loss, and the incredible loyalty of the animal companions who share their lives with us. Our experience at the ancient pet cemetery taught us that love truly is the most powerful force in the universe. But it also taught us about the responsibility that comes with that power. When we love someone or something so deeply that we refuse to let them go, we can inadvertently trap them in a prison of our own making. But there's more to this story that I haven't told you yet. Something that happened just last month that proved our supernatural experience wasn't entirely over. Subscribe to our channel if you want to hear more true paranormal stories, because what I'm about to tell you will show you that sometimes the spirits we help find peace don't forget our kindness. It was a cold February morning when I was working in my home office, editing some photos I'd taken of the restored pet cemetery. The memorial garden had become a beautiful place of reflection, with carefully tended flowers and a small bench where visitors could sit and remember their beloved pets. Several families from the area had started coming by regularly to pay their respects, and I had even been contacted by a local paranormal investigation group who wanted to document the site's history. As I was scrolling through the photos on my computer screen, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. In one of the images taken just the day before, there was a translucent figure sitting on the memorial bench. It was the unmistakable golden form of Buddy, the ghost dog who had been the leader of the pack, that had haunted our property for so many months. But he wasn't trapped or lost anymore. He looked peaceful, content. And there was something in his posture that seemed almost grateful. As I stared at the image, I realized that Buddy wasn't haunting the cemetery. He was visiting it, just as any living dog might visit a favorite spot in the yard. Let me know in the comments if you believe spirits can choose to visit the places they loved, because what happened next convinced me that our connection to the supernatural world doesn't always end when we help spirits find peace. That same evening, as I was putting Emma to bed, she looked out her bedroom window toward the pet cemetery and smiled. "Mommy, Buddy's back," she said softly. I joined her at the window, and there, sitting peacefully among the headstones, was the familiar golden form of our canine guardian. But this time he wasn't alone. A translucent figure knelt beside him, an elderly woman in a long dress who was gently stroking his fur. It was Mrs. Winterbourne, and she was finally reunited with her beloved companion. "She came back to say thank you," Emma whispered, and somehow I knew she was right. As we watched, Mrs. Winterbourne looked up toward our house. And even though she was nothing more than a shimmering figure in the moonlight, I could feel her gratitude washing over me like a warm embrace. She had been waiting on the other side for decades, unable to call her pets home, because they were bound to the physical world by her own desperate love. We had given her the gift of reunion, and now she was giving us the gift of knowing that love, when properly understood, never truly dies. The elderly woman and her faithful dog sat together for several more minutes, and I could see other ghostly forms moving through the cemetery. Not trapped spirits this time, but visiting souls who had chosen to return to a place that held beautiful memories. They were free now, free to come and go as they pleased, free to exist in whatever realm awaited them beyond death. Comment below what you think this final visitation meant, because as I watched Mrs. Winterbourne and Buddy fade into the moonlight, I realized that our property had been transformed from a supernatural prison into something far more beautiful. A bridge between worlds. A place where love could transcend death without becoming a cage. The next morning, I found something on the memorial bench that confirmed everything I had witnessed. It was a single white rose, fresh and perfect with no thorns on its stem. But here's the thing. It was February in Oregon, and there were no rose bushes anywhere on our property. The flower had appeared overnight, left by hands that existed somewhere between the physical and spiritual worlds. I picked up the rose and held it to my nose, breathing in its impossibly sweet fragrance. As I did, I heard something that made tears spring to my eyes. The distant sound of Mrs. Winterbourne's voice, carried on the morning breeze, like a whisper from beyond. "Thank you," she said. Her words barely audible, but filled with decades of pent-up gratitude. Thank you for giving them back to me. That rose lasted for 3 weeks, never wilting, never losing its color or fragrance. It was Mrs. Winterbourne's way of leaving us, a permanent reminder that love, when expressed with wisdom and compassion, can create miracles that span the boundaries between life and death. Hit the like button if this story has touched your heart, because there's one final chapter to this tale that happened just last week, and it involves a discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the Winterbourne family. I was doing some spring cleaning in our basement when I found an old wooden box hidden behind some pipes in the corner. The box was obviously very old, and it was secured with a small brass lock that had long since rusted shut. Using a screwdriver, I carefully pried it open, and inside I found a collection of items that told the true story of Mrs. Winterbourne's final days. There were letters, dozens of them, written in Mrs. Winterbourne's careful handwriting. Most were addressed to her deceased pets, but others were written to future families who might live in the house. One letter dated just days before her death was addressed, simply, "To those who will understand." In that letter, Mrs. Winterbourne revealed something that changed my entire understanding of what had happened on our property. She hadn't been a crazy old woman who couldn't let go of her pets. She had been a gifted spiritual medium who had deliberately bound their spirits to the property to protect it from something far more sinister. According to the letter, there had been a malevolent entity on the property long before the Winterbournes built their house. It was something ancient and evil, something that fed on negative emotions and used the land as a gateway to influence the living world. Mrs. Winterbourne had discovered this entity shortly after moving to the property, and she'd realized that her beloved pets were the only thing standing between it and the families who would live there in the future. "I have bound my precious companions to this place, not out of selfishness," she wrote, "but out of love for the innocent families who will call this property home. My dogs and cats are warriors of the light, guardians who will stand watch against the darkness that seeks to corrupt this sacred ground. They will protect future generations, until someone with the wisdom to understand can help them find a better way." The letter went on to explain that Mrs. Winterbourne had been waiting for a family who would show the same love and respect for animals that she had shown. A family who would understand that the pets weren't trapped, but were serving as protectors. She had believed that such a family would eventually help her beloved companions find a way to guard the property from the spiritual realm, rather than being bound to the physical world. Share this video with someone who loves supernatural stories, because what happened next proved that Mrs. Winterbourne's faith in the power of love had been justified all along. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was a small silver pendant in the shape of a dog's paw. According to a note attached to it, the pendant had been blessed by a powerful spiritual healer, and was meant to be worn by someone who would serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits. The note explained that whoever wore the pendant would be able to communicate with the guardian spirits and help coordinate their protection of the property. From the spiritual realm, it was Mrs. Winterbourne's final gift, a way for future caretakers to maintain the spiritual protection of the property without keeping the animal spirits bound to the physical world. I held the pendant in my hands, feeling its weight and warmth, and I knew that Mrs. Winterbourne had always intended for this moment to happen. She had planned everything: the discovery of the pet cemetery, the gradual revelation of the spirits, and eventually, the transition from physical haunting to spiritual guardianship. That night, I put on the pendant and walked out to the pet cemetery, under the full moon as I stood among the headstones. I felt a familiar presence, but this time it was different. The animal spirits were still there, but they were free, existing in a state of pure spiritual energy that allowed them to protect the property without being trapped by it. I could sense their gratitude, their joy at being reunited with their beloved owner, and their commitment to continuing their protection of the families who would live on the property. But now they were serving as guardians by choice, not by supernatural compulsion. Let me know in the comments if you believe in the power of spiritual protection, because what I experienced that night convinced me that there are forces of light and love that work constantly to protect us from the darkness that exists in the spiritual realm. As I stood there wearing Mrs. Winterbourne's pendant, I felt the presence of the malevolent entity that had originally threatened the property. It was still there, lurking at the edges of the spiritual realm, waiting for an opportunity to break through and influence the living world. But now I could also feel the protective barrier that the guardian spirits had created, a wall of pure love and devotion that kept the darkness at bay. The animal spirits had become something more than ghosts. They had become spiritual warriors, protectors who used their unconditional love and loyalty as weapons against the forces of evil. And Mrs. Winterbourne, finally reunited with her beloved companions, was their general, coordinating their efforts from whatever realm she now inhabited. I understood then that our property wasn't just a house with a pet cemetery. It was a spiritual battleground, where forces of light and darkness had been engaged in an eternal struggle. The Winterbourne pets weren't just protecting our family. They were protecting everyone who would ever live on the property, and everyone who would visit the memorial garden we had created. Comment below what you think about the battle between spiritual forces, because what happened over the following weeks proved that our role as caretakers of this sacred ground was just beginning. Strange things began to happen in the neighborhood, but not the frightening kind of strange we had experienced before. People reported feeling unusually peaceful when they walked past our property. Children who had been having nightmares found that their bad dreams stopped after visiting the pet cemetery. Families who were going through difficult times discovered that sitting on the memorial bench brought them comfort and clarity. Our property had become a beacon of spiritual protection, and the guardian spirits were extending their influence beyond our boundaries to help anyone who needed it. The pendant allowed me to sense when the spirits were working, and I could feel their energy flowing outward like ripples on a pond. touching lives and bringing healing to people who didn't even know why. They suddenly felt better. The local paranormal investigation group that had been studying our property confirmed what I'd suspected. Their electromagnetic field readings showed that our land was generating a type of positive, spiritual energy that they had never encountered before. They called it a love resonance, a frequency that seemed to amplify positive emotions and provide protection against negative spiritual influences. But the most remarkable discovery came when they used thermal imaging cameras to document the pet cemetery. At night, the images clearly showed the forms of the guardian spirits. But instead of appearing as cold spots like most ghosts, they radiated warmth and light. They were visible proof that love, when properly channeled, could create a form of spiritual energy that was literally bright enough to be captured on camera. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our supernatural content. Because what I'm about to tell you proves that the bond between humans and their pets is so powerful that it can literally change the spiritual landscape of a place. 6 months after our initial encounter with the pet cemetery spirits, we received a visit from a woman named Carol, who had driven 3 hours from Portland to see our property. She was elderly, probably in her 80s, and she carried with her a small metal box that she clutched tightly to her chest. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "My grandmother was Margaret Winterbourne. She lived in this house until she died in 1958. I've spent my whole life wondering if she was crazy, or if the things she wrote about in her letters were real." Carol opened the metal box and showed me dozens of letters that Mrs. Winterbourne had written to her family over the years. In them, she described her spiritual experiences with her pets, her belief that they were protecting the property, and her hope that someday someone would understand what she was trying to accomplish. The family thought she had lost her mind. Carol continued. They said she was a crazy old woman who couldn't let go of her dead pets. But I always believed there was something more to it. When I heard about what happened here, about how you helped the spirits find peace, I knew I had to come and see for myself. We spent the entire afternoon sharing stories about Mrs. Winterbourne and her beloved pets. Carol had photos of the animals from when they were alive, and she was able to identify each spirit by name, based on the descriptions I gave her. She also had documents that confirmed everything we had discovered about the malevolent entity that had originally threatened the property. Grandmother was a gifted medium. Carol explained she could see things that other people couldn't see. And she understood the spiritual world in ways that most people never will. She sacrificed her own peace of mind to protect future generations from something that could have destroyed their lives. And as the sun began to set, Carol asked if she could visit the pet cemetery and pay her respects to her grandmother's beloved companions. We walked together to the memorial garden, and as we stood among the headstones, something incredible happened. The air began to shimmer, and slowly the familiar forms of the guardian spirits began to appear. But this time they weren't alone. Mrs. Winterbourne materialized beside them, looking exactly as she had in the old photographs Carol had shown me. Grandmother and granddaughter stood facing each other, across the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds. And the love between them was so powerful that it made the air itself seem to vibrate with emotion. "Thank you," Mrs. Winterbourne whispered, her voice carrying clearly across the dimensions. "Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for understanding what I was trying to do." Our Carol reached out as if to touch her grandmother, and although her hand passed through the ghostly figure, both women smiled with the joy of finally being reunited after decades of separation. Let me know in the comments if you believe that love can transcend death, because what happened next proved that the bonds we form in life continue to exist long after we pass away. Mrs. Winterbourne turned to me and nodded with deep gratitude. You have given me the greatest gift possible. She said you have allowed me to show my family that love never dies. And that sometimes, the things that seem impossible are actually the most real things. Of all the guardian spirits gathered around their beloved owner. And for a brief moment, the pet cemetery was filled with the most beautiful scene I had ever witnessed. The spiritual family was complete grandmother, granddaughter, and the beloved pets who had served as bridges between their worlds. As the apparitions began to fade, Mrs. Winterbourne spoke one final time. "The protection will continue," she said. "But now it comes from love freely given, not from grief that refuses to let go. This land will always be sacred, and the spirits of all the beloved pets who rest here will always be guardians of the light." And with that, she was gone. But the warmth of her presence lingered in the air like a blessing. Carol stayed for dinner that evening, and we shared more stories about the incredible power of the bond between humans and their pets. She left the next morning, but not before making a donation to help maintain the memorial garden, and asking us to keep her informed about any future spiritual experiences on the property. Share your own pet stories in the comments. Because what happened in the weeks following Carol's visit convinced me that our property had become something even more special than a spiritual battleground. It had become a place where the love between humans and animals could transcend every barrier that exists. Between life and death, people began coming from hundreds of miles away to visit the memorial garden. They brought flowers for the headstones, photos of their own deceased pets, and stories of the animal companions who had touched their lives. The bench became a place of pilgrimage for anyone who had ever loved and lost a pet. And the guardian spirits seemed to extend their protection to every visitor who came with genuine love in their heart. We started getting letters from people who had visited the cemetery, describing miraculous experiences they had while sitting among the headstones. Some said they felt the presence of their own deceased pets, offering comfort and closure. Others reported feeling a sense of peace and healing that helped them deal with grief and loss. A few even claimed to have seen the spirits of their beloved animals playing happily in the memorial garden, alongside the Winterbourne pets. The most remarkable story came from a man named David, who had driven from California to visit the cemetery. After hearing about it from a friend, David had lost his German Shepherd Max in a car accident 6 months earlier, and he had been devastated by the loss. He had been unable to sleep, unable to eat, and unable to find any peace in his grief. But when he sat on the memorial bench and spoke to Max's spirit, something incredible happened. Incredible, he felt a familiar presence beside him. And when he looked down, he saw the ghostly form of Max sitting at his feet, looking up at him with the same loving eyes that had comforted him throughout the dog's life. Max stayed with me for almost an hour. David wrote in his letter, he was there, really there, and I could feel his love surrounding me like a warm blanket. When he finally faded away, I knew that he was happy, and I knew that our love for each other would never die. For the first time since the accident, I was able to smile, and I knew that I was going to be okay. Comment below if you've ever felt the presence of a beloved pet after they passed away, because David's story is just one of dozens that prove our memorial garden has become a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and where love can overcome even death itself. The memorial garden continued to grow and evolve. We added more benches, created walking paths between the headstones, and planted flowers that would bloom throughout the year. The city of Salem officially recognized the site as a historical landmark, and the local animal shelter began holding adoption events there, believing that the presence of the guardian spirits would help match pets with the families who needed them most. But the most important change was in our own family. Emma and Jake had grown up knowing that death wasn't the end of love, that the bonds we form with our animal companions continued to exist, beyond the physical world. They had learned to see the spiritual realm as a natural extension of the physical world. And they had developed a deep respect for the power of unconditional love. When we finally decided to get a dog of our own, we knew exactly where to find her. At one of the adoption events held in the Memorial Garden, we met Luna, a golden retriever mix, who seemed to have been waiting specifically for our family. As soon as she saw the kids, she ran to them with her tail wagging. And it was clear that she had chosen us, just as much as we had chosen her. What made Luna's adoption even more special was what happened when we brought her home. As soon as she entered the house, she went straight to the spot where Buddy's spirit had first appeared to us, and she sat down exactly where the ghost dog had been sitting. She looked up at us with intelligent eyes, and I swear I could see recognition there, as if she knew she was taking on a role that had been waiting for her. Let me know in the comments if you believe that some pets are meant to be together across lifetimes. Because Luna's behavior over the following months convinced me that she had some kind of spiritual connection to the guardian spirits who protected our property. Luna seemed to be able to see things that we couldn't see. She would often sit in the Memorial Garden, watching something that was invisible to human eyes, her tail wagging gently as if she was greeting old friends. Sometimes she would walk through the house, following paths that seemed to correspond to the routes that the ghost pets had taken during their earthly manifestations. But the most remarkable thing about Luna was her ability to comfort people who were grieving. When visitors came to the Memorial Garden to mourn their lost pets, Luna would approach them with a gentle, knowing expression and offer exactly the kind of comfort they needed. She seemed to understand that her role wasn't just to be our family pet, but to serve as a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, helping people connect with the spirits of their beloved animals. One evening, as I was sitting in the Memorial Garden with Luna beside me, I felt the familiar presence of the guardian spirits. Gathering around us, the air grew warm, and I could sense their approval and gratitude. They had found a way to extend their protection and comfort through Luna, using her as a living vessel for their love and healing energy. As I sat there with my hand on Luna's head, I realized that our story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The Memorial Garden had become a place where the bonds between humans and animals could transcend every barrier that exists between life and death. The guardian spirits had found a way to continue their work through the living, creating a legacy of love that would continue for generations to come. Share this video with someone who loves animals, because what I've learned from our experience with the ancient pet cemetery is that the love we share with our pets is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. It's a love that can transcend death, heal grief, and create miracles that science can't explain. The bond between humans and their animal companions is sacred, and it deserves to be honored and celebrated. When we love our pets with the same depth and devotion that the Winterborn showed their beloved animals, we create connections that last forever. But we also need to understand that love, to be truly powerful, must be free, Mrs. Winterborn's initial mistake was trying to hold on to her pets, out of her own need, rather than allowing them to move on to whatever comes next. It was only when we helped her understand that love means letting go, that she was able to find peace and transform her grief into something beautiful. The ancient pet cemetery on our property is no longer a place of supernatural haunting. It's a place of spiritual healing, where the love between humans and animals continues to work miracles. Every day the guardian spirits are still there, still protecting and comforting, but now they do it out of joy rather than obligation. And somewhere in the spiritual realm, Mrs. Winterborn continues to watch over the Memorial Garden, making sure that every pet who is laid to rest there is honored and remembered, and that every person who visits finds the comfort and healing they need. Thank you for watching our story. And thank you for understanding that the love we share with our pets is something that can literally change the world. Subscribe to our channel for more true supernatural stories. And let me know in the comments about your own experiences with beloved pets who have crossed over to the other side. Until next time, remember that love never dies. It just transforms into something even more beautiful and powerful than we ever imagined possible.